My talk is We're Stuffed. It was going to be called something else, but I toned it down a bit. But we don't need to be. And this doesn't work. And now it works. I got headshots done recently, so I have to use them. It's very awkward. Someone told me the other day I look like a mix of Chris Martin and Ryan Reynolds, which explained why everyone's disappointed after meeting me. My name is Greg Van der Gaast. I'm currently a professional hobo, author, speaker, obviously, and consultant. I got my start, I've said this so many times, I've told this story. I got my start 25 years ago when my sister brought home a VHS copy of the movie Hackers. And what this movie taught me as an impressionable 16-year-old boy was that if you hack computers, you get with Angelina Jolie. So I was highly motivated, obviously. People think, oh, nation states, money. No, it's Angie. So I was highly motivated, and within a year, hacked a nuclear weapons facility. And I've still not seen Angie. I'm not allowed within 100 yards of her anymore. But the DoD was quite interested in this, and the FBI was too, so they came to my house. And I was quite cocky at the time because I thought, I don't think you guys can prove anything. I was worried you guys were from immigration because I was living in the US sort of semi-illegally, and that's when suit number 4 went, I'm from immigration. So I was put in a van, spent a week in a detention facility of some kind. There was a story about being given an orange t-shirt with the words escape risk on it. That made me very unpopular among the inmates. And after about a week, they came and picked me up and offered me a job. I spent the next 3 years with the DoD and the FBI doing some unusual stuff. Some of it was maybe offensive, as in offensive security, not that offensive, that I do all on my own. Some counterintelligence, but also some really weird stuff like high-speed chase in Baton Rouge or aerial surveillance. Or that one time I had to meet an arms dealer with a recording device taped to my testicles, where it wouldn't be found when being patted down, which is awkward, but not as awkward as the removal process. Ladies, you have all my sympathy. Did that for about 3 years. 9/11 happened, and then they wanted to do some really crazy stuff, so I said, guys, I'm out. I then got a normal job, working as a consultant for a big IT consultancy. And I did that for about 10 years, and these were the days where I had so many security certifications I could not fit them in my signature because Microsoft Exchange wouldn't allow a string that long. Fitting all the latest, greatest tech to these big companies, getting paid a lot of money, buying a lot of cars off of it. It was, in terms of doing security, probably the least productive period of my life in terms of the actual amount of assurance that I generate. And this is what I figured out in hindsight. And the funny thing is, when I first started out in my career, and I would just quote stuff from books because I had 0 experience, 9 times out of 10 I would get a job if I went to an interview. And in my later years, once I started really working out what works, what didn't, no, don't do it like those dead people do it this way. Once I had those insights that provided value, no one wanted to hire me anymore because they weren't the answers that they expected. You know what I'm on about. So it became this insights non grata, and I actually buggered off for a while and started a shooting range and got into automotive and slacked off to Italy for a few years. Italy is fantastic. It's also a recipe for going broke, which is why I needed a job again and came back to IT. So ended up writing a book called Rethinking InfoSec. That got me some attention, and here I am today. Now, I just finished my last gig as a CISO, took a nice severance package, and I'm now basically freelance speaking, consulting, goofing off, really. I want to talk about the security industry because I'm going to slag it off a lot, or at least I used to slag it off a lot. So some of the, I think, hot topics you see in security are attribution of attacks. I go to security conferences, I see this talked about a lot, which I think is hilarious, yes, because you're going to convince Russia to hand some guy over at some point. You know, we need to be harder on the perpetrators. You're never going to solve the problem that way. No way. Vulnerability management. Yeah, we do a lot of managing vulnerabilities, but why do we have so many? Nobody's asking. Threat intelligence. We need to know. We need to go out there and scan entire telco networks to find out who is doing what. But we're not actually going to patch all these systems that we know are vulnerable that we have right here on the front door. Detection response, we really need to detect all the stuff, exploiting all the stuff we didn't fix. Instant response, yeah, we forgot to fix that. We missed someone, they broke in, we need to respond now. And recovery and resilience, which I love how resilience in security terms, in the security industry is, we fell down, we need to get back up. To me, resilience should mean don't fall down. And one of the things I learned about my hacking days was actually, weirdly, I think I learned more about how to do defense. Because I remember being 15, 16 years old and building a system and going on the internet relay chat. And the first few times I did this and joined some hacker chat room, back then hard drives made noises and had little blinky LEDs. And they started making a lot of noise and blinking very hard, and then everything crashed because they just hacked you in 30 seconds and formatted your hard drive. And so you had to learn how to really harden your machine before you even went to hang out in an environment where these people hung out. The funny thing is, none of these things existed at the time. None of them I used. And yet, I managed to be impervious to attack just by having a hardened system. So why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we scaling this up, right? And yes, I know, but in end users, you can't protect against them. Dave or Doris, thank you for equality and all, is going to click some email, and that's why we're on the front page of the news. Like, if Dave or Doris clicking an email results in from marketing, let's say, results in your entire IT infrastructure being compromised, chances are there was a few screw-ups between them and the end result. Things were missed, things were not addressed. We cannot just blame them. I'm going to bore you to death now with my extremely old and outdated analogy, which I have updated a little bit, which I call the car factory. And I want you to imagine that you are standing on the street, in front of you is a car factory, and you have a big building on one side and a car park or parking lot, whatever you call it from whatever part of the world you're from. And these cars are being produced on this assembly line, and maybe 100 different positions on this assembly line, and then they're being pushed out into this parking lot to be sold. The only problem is the cars are being pushed off from the 3rd floor. So by the time they land in the parking lot, they're all smashed up. So we have to quickly take that car, put it off in the corner, get some people over there, assess it, build a little workshop around it, get some people, okay, what's wrong with it? What do we need to fix it? Which parts do we need? What's the order to actually repair it? What do we need to dismantle, repair, put back together? There's several things wrong with it. How do we prioritize? What's good enough? Let's set some standards to determine that. Let's prioritize. Let's set up like a system to actually manage all this workflow. Let's, again, those standards, let's get some auditors, make sure we're following. God, we could maybe work faster. We had better tools. Let's get some vendors in, settle some better, faster tools and some consultants in. But we need a lot of technical people to do all this work, right? And that's hard to train. That takes a long time to build up. There's pressure in the market. They're quite expensive. And next thing you know, and this is happening every 2 minutes, a new car is falling down. And next thing you know, you've got a car with thousands of, parking lot with thousands of cars in it, tens of thousands of people all going about changing parts, trying to get them roadworthy. And even then, there's so much to do, we can't possibly fix it all. So a lot of that stuff is going out so-so, just enough, and then has a massive accident, and then we have a big problem dealing with that accident and a big lawsuit and all this stuff. This is more or less the security industry today. And we are hiring, we need incredibly skilled, technically skilled people. And they're harder and harder to find. And you hear about this skills gap for years and years and years now. And it's only getting worse. And in fact, if you look at security spending, it's going up and up and up and up. And the actual number of breaches that is being prevented by all the spending is going down. No, it's not actually. It's going up even faster. I once had a presentation where I had 2 slides, 2 graphs on one slide actually. And one showed a line going up, another one showing other line on the same graph going up even more. And I'd tell people, this is the gun ownership rate per capita in the US and the murder rate per capita in the US. And they said, yeah, of course, stupid Americans. And the other one is, this is the investment in security, and this is the corresponding reduction in incidents. And they're, yes, that's why we do our jobs. One problem is I switched the graphs. So sometimes, pigs kill more people than sharks. We don't always have the best approach. The funny thing is, I'm some weirdo who then, instead of hiring all these technical people, I like to hire people transitioning into the industry. People who, you've all seen this on LinkedIn, they will not get hired. Everybody wants 5 years of tech experience for an entry-level job. I will hire an ex-teacher, an ex-air hostess, business owner, sales guy, policeman. And they'll stand there in the parking lot watching these six-figure CISSPs run to the nearest car and change a radiator. And they'll feel very awkward because they don't feel qualified. They have imposter syndrome. They don't feel like they belong there. And then they'll ask me a really stupid question. Do you know what that question is? It's, why the fuck are we dropping cars from the 3rd floor? Exactly. Why don't we go into the factory and rearrange the assembly line? Technically, we're not dropping them from the 3rd floor. We are introducing defects at every stage of manufacturing when we build systems, applications, all this stuff. And you know what these people have that all the techies in the parking lot don't have? Engagement skills, communication skills, business skills, things that take far longer to teach to someone than, say, the contents of a CISSP course. So what I want to talk today is how do we scale up the approach of actually building stuff properly at an enterprise level so we don't need to do all this stuff in the first place. Or as Ben pointed out, you do need some of these tools, but use them strategically. And I'll give an example of that later. I recently posted something on LinkedIn about how I build an information security framework or program as a CISO. And because I'm lazy, it's just bullet points here, but normally this is a big box on the outside. Imagine the white square being a big box. And each one of these things is a layer. It's not necessarily a hierarchy, but there are different areas. And within those areas, there are different documents, standards, processes, whatever. And the first one is an executive layer, which most companies don't have. It's, what's my executive charter for security? What support do I have from senior management? Am I going to be allowed to have access and a say over all projects, all changes, visibility to all IT infrastructure, sufficient, am I a defined team? I usually have a strategy statement of this is the team I want because the strategy I want to achieve is this. I want security to be a quality function. I want to enhance how we build stuff here in these departments, not just build a big SOC. And this is all stuff that you need executive support for. You define how you want to structure your team. You need a security strategy, and I love how we're all doing the same thing without actually looking, just repeating the status quo without actually looking at the organization we're working for. Why would you build a strategy that requires a huge number of people that are very hard to get, expensive to hire, and even more difficult to retain? When there's a massive pool of people here dying to get into the industry who have skills to address a problem somewhere else. Yes, it's complex, but instead of being incredibly technically complex, it's more soft skills, people skills, but you can address a whole bunch of issues further upstream using those resources. Why aren't we using them? Why are we insisting on using something that's very rare, very expensive, and not really sustainable? So that's the strategy. I'll typically have a few more documents like an overview and maintenance. Okay, we're going to create all this. We have to maintain this framework. We're going to have to schedule all the activities within it. That's another layer. HR and legal. Every time legal goes out, we're going to strike a partnership deal or an acquisition or something. I want to be involved in that. So I need direct involvement with legal. So that's defined there. Every time we get a new employee, every time an employee leaves, every time we onboard someone, I want HR involved. I want to, how do I legally, or at least from a corporate policy standpoint, define who does what and what access should they have? I need to standardize that through job roles. I need to standardize even things like culture and background checks or what training they have, in terms of mandatory awareness training. I need to go through HR, so I need to define all of those things. Compliance is an interesting one because I don't believe that we should be chasing NIST or C++ or ISO. I think we should be defining all the processes that comes next. Identify absolutely everything we do within our own business. And once that's defined, our compliance is, are we compliant to the way that we've dictated our business should run? Be compliant to your own standard. And by having gone through your own business and all its processes, you've covered everything. So being compliant to an external standard becomes a walk in the park. It's just a mapping exercise, which becomes a commercial advantage as well, and we'll get to that later. Then there's the IT ops stuff, the architecture, everything you do. How do I do asset management? How do I do patching? How do I build systems? How do I update stuff? What are my logging standards? How is it housed? How do I do IAM? Absolutely everything. How do I do disaster recovery? All these IT processes, they're in there. Another big thing that gets missed a lot is business applications. a lot of people look at their servers and their data centers and all this stuff. Have you looked at your Salesforce? Have you looked at all your SaaS applications that your engineering department is using? Very few people do, and there's a lot of stuff in there. And finally, the product and engineering side of stuff as well. Everything your company, if you're developing, whether it's SaaS applications, software, hardware, OT, how are you building it to make sure that you have security principles built in? I think Ben was talking about a lot of concepts about these layers, but we need to address layers lower down as well. It's a valid concept, but I think we need to get further down. Human factors is fantastic. I think most people think human factors is awareness training. That is a tiny part of awareness training. So my last CISO role, I had a human factors person, and her job was basically go out and talk to people. Identify people in every job role and just have 15, 20 calls every week and find out what's going on. Every single position. What do you do? What do you deal with? What data do you come in contact with? What system? How do you log into that? And we start discovering all these business processes that otherwise you would never even know about. And it also builds a really good relationship between security and these people. It shows that we actually care what they're doing. We're not hiding in the basement, and we try to facilitate. And quite often we find they're frustrated because they can't do certain things because the IT hasn't been built right for their job. But no one's actually spoken to each other about any of this stuff. It's a fantastic cultural tool. And you'd be amazed at the stuff that you find. Our biggest risks were found through just talking to people. Because we may have logging tools and EDR and all this, and all it told me was that Doris or Dave, or Matt in this case, he looks like a very, very busy guy. But the fact is, he actually left the company 2 years ago, and 30 people are using his admin account. But that doesn't show up in the logs. And the processes weren't integrated, so no one actually knew any of this. So it's amazing what you find just talking to people. You can do process engineering as well, like find out how people are working. It's like, yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. Let's re-engineer this process to eliminate human error. These are all things that add to the overall assurance, stop things from going wrong in the first place. Only at this point should we start doing security operations. After we've created layer after layer after layer of better assurance and security, only at this point do we start monitoring and detecting. And the beauty is, you're not going to need a SOC with 500 people. You'll do fine with 3. And it's very important to do this strategically, by which I mean, I've detected an attacker has broken into this laptop because this patch wasn't installed. I've stopped it. I've patched it. Great. Why wasn't it patched? What's wrong with the patching process? What's wrong with the patching tool? Is the asset management process not feeding it right? What caused this to happen? Fix that. That particular issue will never happen again. And John made a really good point earlier. It's incredibly expensive for us to stop attackers, to do security the way we're currently doing. And it's very, very easy for attackers to do it. But if we actually build properly, well, if I have a hardened system that they can't hack into, I need to do 0 effort to protect that. And they can try 1 billion times to run exploits against it. They're not going to succeed. So it completely flips that equation on its head. And the last part is a commercial one, which is probably not for this audience, but I want everyone to start thinking commercially because there's actually huge security benefits for it. So a commercial security, I have no idea how I'm doing on time, by the way. A commercial security strategy. I was talking to John Lewis a couple months ago, and I was asking, what's your commercial, about a CISO role, what's your commercial security strategy? And they're like, well, our security strategy, we just want to secure these point-of-sale devices. That was their biggest focus. And I'm like, well, that's not really a strategy, and it's certainly not a commercial one. So I'm like, well, example, Target, 20 years ago, they started using customer loyalty card data to predict which of their clients was pregnant. And this is before big data, 20 years ago. And they were often able to predict who was pregnant before those people themselves knew it. And they started doing very targeted marketing. And pregnant ladies are fantastic because they buy everything. Baby strollers, food, furniture, diapers. They spend a lot of money. And that helped them become very successful. And 20 years later, Target's a chain in the States. You guys probably don't know it. But there are now actual memes about guys camping out in the parking lot for hours, creating bromances and just clubs together because their wives will spend the entire day in there. That's how successful they've been at targeting women and getting women absolutely hooked on Target. No pun intended. So what you actually need, John Lewis, is you need better data about your customers. You need to leverage security to increase your customers' confidence to give you their data. So that's first of it. And you can go even further. Like, people are paying 10 quid a month to Equifax to monitor their credit and their internet accounts. Why don't you offer that for free? So now your end customer, instead of, oh, I'm being a savvy customer, I'm not going to give you my data, they go to, oh, I'm savvy about my data, so I'm going to give it to you so you can monitor it for me. And that means John Lewis now has their data, and they can target them and boost their sales. So that's a commercial strategy. In terms of B2B, like at Scoutbee, we had big companies like Unilever come to us with requests for tenders between us and competitors. And there's absolutely nothing security related in the tender request. Absolutely nothing. But we'd reply with, have you thought about your security? Because we're aware that in your industry you have these risks. Here's a 9-page PDF that we compile with all these pretty graphs. And that's why we develop our software this way and run this, and why we have a human factors function and integrate and everything looks really slick and well thought of, and we've identified the risks and showed how we addressed them. And they went back and like, well, we'd never thought of that. That's a really good point. And they went and asked our competitors the same questions. And they just went, we got a certificate? And that just wasn't good enough anymore. And all of a sudden, we made security a really powerful sales point. And that makes it a sales enabler. And the other thing is, by having done security, having security actually define how so many parts of the business operate securely, everything was documented. We could go through RFI processes very, very quickly. It looked very professional. Not just security processes, but how our operations teams worked, how scouting teams worked, how all these different functions worked. The system architecture, the engineering was putting together. We had all that on paper, diagrams, all that stuff. Compliance is another one. When I said you determine what your company needs and then map it to compliance, that means if all of a sudden, VW is one of your customers and they have their own compliance framework for the automotive industry, well, we can map it to it very quickly. And that means we can enter new verticals, we can enter new regions, new geographies that have different standards because we have our own. It has covered everything because we've gone through our entire business. Every single thing we do, here's how we've secured it. So it's very easy just to map everything. You will never be missing anything. Whereas if you try to follow a standard, you will miss everything your business has that the standard hasn't thought of. Security branding, obviously a good thing, People given this choice between two companies, same service, same price point. If one has better security branding, well, yeah, I'd rather my data be secure if I'm going to get the same service for the same price. Track record is a nice one. It's kind of an old school one. If I'm, say, a telco and I've not been breached in 10, 20 years and my competitor gets breached every 18 months, people are probably going to prefer me for business. Treating security as a quality function, which is how I see it, has huge amounts of benefits beyond security. So most vulnerabilities in code and system architecture and not being patched, poor processes, they're quality issues. If a piece of software, for every security vulnerability, security bug that a product has, it probably has 10 usability issues. So if I've defined how we build systems, how we engineer, how we do coding, to eliminate, to have really high quality, chances are I'm actually also reducing a whole bunch of bad user experiences, a whole bunch of remediation work on those fronts as well. That saves money. I've seen DevOps teams have incredible churn, HR departments on full chat trying to hire and retain DevOps people all the time. Why were they leaving? Because the code and the architecture is crap and we don't want to maintain it. It's draining. Ben's laughing. He knows what I'm talking about. It's like one person should be able to maintain this, but instead you need 6. Little things like a big one lately, Python is 76 times more computationally intensive than C, but no one looks at this. So, security can go in and well, we want to make it more efficient because A, it means I need 76 times fewer systems, a lot less security. And by the way, I just saved you guys 98.3% on your AWS bill. These are all commercial benefits. And finally, having a business focus instead of this obsessive tech risk focus actually helps us make things more secure. So one thing I've noticed, I started doing risk exceptions Just finding them, documenting them, accepting them. But then I started every issue, every bit of monitoring, every bit of support, every customer request that I had to say no to because we architected something poorly and that would expose something else if we did that, and we lost that commercial opportunity. Start tacking, I was doing this in Jira, just start tacking on that cost. And all of a sudden you start realizing, yeah, we saved those 20 grand in that extra effort security wanted to us, but it actually cost us 150 grand in opportunities. So that's one. But if I'm creating marketing, if I'm speeding up the sales process, if I'm increasing customer retention and confidence, if I'm adding new selling points, if I'm going through, for example, I was talking about all the SaaS platforms that we use. We did a security review on Salesforce that cost £20,000 because just about everyone had admin on it and it was poorly configured because they didn't quite know how it worked. So I hired a consultancy and they charged me £20,000 to fix it. And it actually worked better afterwards. It was a smoother process for the end user. And we found £48,000 a year in license savings. So they weren't so pissed at me for spending the £20,000 afterwards. And we found like waste everywhere because there's a very, very much like siloed thinking in different departments. Everyone just thinks about their job and now not how it's going to impact other things. If you start, and that's a culture thing as well, so if you start driving that culture, that way of thinking, the savings, the efficiency, the visibility it brings to the business, they're really appreciated. CFO likes that I save him money. General counsel likes that I'm speeding things up and making compliance better. CEO also likes money. Like everyone, the chief commercial officer, chief marketing officer, they all like what we're doing. We're all business relevant. We're not in the basement fighting risk. We are adding to the business. They want us in the discussions. And that means I find out so much more about what the business is actually doing. And I'm able to protect it. And I use the analogy of, say I've got a 13-year-old daughter and she wants to go to the festival that's full of MDMA and God knows what else. I'm going to say, hell no. However, and that's a typical security stance, but what if I always took the time, found out what they were into, nurtured their hobbies, supported them, did things, helped them develop their talents, be the cool dad, and then she wants to go to the festival and it's like, Dad, can we go to the festival? Will you come with me? And I was like, yeah. So she gets to go to the festival. I'm not Mr. No Man, and I get to protect her. The whole time I'm doing not just the festival, but absolutely everything else, I'm in the background protecting. And I'm in far more places protecting than if I'd just been a security dictator, just thinking about risk all the time. I am running on time, he says. Quick summary. So approach security holistically. I'm going to say if you were doing the security status quo, it's probably wrong. Because, well, for all the reasons we saw in the part. Build a framework that fits you. Don't chase compliance. Go through your business systematically. Consider layers of dependencies. So you have, a lot of people build, you can even have companies that build secure code, and they have secure systems, and they have secure their operating systems, and secure applications, and all this stuff, great, and they got great processes managing it. And then they find out 6 months later that actually you were running on a Windows 2008 hypervisor, and everything's been compromised. Systems include people and processes, so you have to think how they work together. You have to consider the user experience, what they do, really go through what people are doing, find out, and enable them to work in such a way that they can do their work, but securely. Create trusted foundations within the company, obviously. Use tech strategically. Now, again, SOC, not a bad thing. Like Ben said, all these technologies, not a bad thing. But if there's a cascading effect where an issue ends up here and you're only fixing that issue there without leveraging that knowledge, that little bit of string you've been given to chase it up the chain and solve that problem so it doesn't keep repeating itself, which is the mess we're stuck in now, what's the point? Don't work in silo. You're not an IT department or a security department. Security is in everything. We say this, so we have to be too. Create business value and relationships because it's going to get you huge amounts of support and extra visibility. And just influence everyone to build better and work better together and explain the benefits because there are some real commercial ones that give us this amazing kind of wind in our sails if we take that approach as opposed to the pure techie one. That's me. Mike Gaast is next. The title of his talk is, why is this still so hard? I'm giving £10 to whoever says that's what she said first. During his talk. Thanks, Matt. I knew you'd be up for it.
Right. Thank you very much indeed.